Welcome everyone to the Pearson Business Book Club. My name is Eloise Cook and I'm the publisher for the professional business lists at Pearson. So each month at the book club, we choose a Pearson business or personal development book and invite the author on to discuss it. They'll also give a webinar on a key concept from the book. If you need to leave halfway through, we are recording this and the video you'll be able to watch the video on demand at the book club website. So what's our book this month? It is The 9 Types of Difficult People by Nick Robinson. It's exciting. Hello, Nick.
Hello, hello.
If you haven't got a copy yet, you can buy this through the book club page or on pearson.com. I'm popping in the link. You haven't got a copy? It's also available everywhere else. And don't forget, you can use the Q&A function to ask Nick a question at any time. We'll usually get to those at the end, but if something's pressing, we can jump in. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Right, so I'm going to give you a little introduction, Nick. You have over 2 decades experience as an executive coach working with managers across every size and type of organisation. You're a former chartered accountant, a certified professional coach, an NLP master practitioner and a graduate of the Newfield School's Mastery and Coaching Programme, crikey. And we've got an interesting fact. This is very interesting. You had an out-of-body experience when visiting a mountain shrine site in Japan a few years ago. And when you're at the top of the mountain, you heard a friendly voice whisper, "Run." And you ran down the path as fast as you could. And you said you've never felt so alive or in the zone before. That sounds like a real experience. Wow.
Yeah, that sounds a little weird actually to hear that. Yeah, it was actually quite a really moving thing. You know, I still don't really understand what happened, and it was quite a steep slope, and I thought I was going to come off the mountain a couple of times, but it was just wonderful. And I often wonder, like, what on earth was that voice saying? You know, run! It was like someone spoke it in my ear. So I promise the rest of this is not going to be weird.
Well, there is that kind of interesting sort of intersect between sort of business and the spirituality. You know, they can sort of intersect a little. But yeah, if I suppose it's in the right place, in the right frame of mind, these things can happen, can't they?
Yeah, I think so. And, you know, I think if there was a practical message from that for this, it's about, you know, like listening to your intuition, because whatever your situation might be, if you're dealing with a difficult person or something's tough at work, then your intuition probably is telling you something important about it. So
Yeah, that's fact number 1. We'll keep track of them. So let's start with our usual questions. So we always ask authors the same 3 questions. So tell us, Nick, why did you want to write this book?
yeah, well, you know, there's like a positive reason and a negative one, Eloise. Like the positive one is I didn't really pick this coaching with a difficult person. It kind of picked me. And I'll say a bit more about that later. So one of the things I realized was like people are not always finding their work easy, and they're not always having a great time with their relationships at work. And I just wanted to have something to give them, so that when my coaching assignment was done, I could say, like, hey, you know, like, that was great. It was great working with you. And there's like more stuff here. So take this and read this. And like, if you get stuck again, you can use this. So I just wanted it. So that's a positive reason. And the negative one was I just got fed up with a number of people who that there's a few really basic things, and we'll cover some of those this afternoon. There's a few really basic things you can do that makes everybody's life at work great. And if you're not doing them, or if you're doing the opposite, then everybody's life at work is miserable. So part of my motivation was just like really being fed up with noticing that.
Yeah, I love it. I can't wait to hear the things, the easy things. But yeah, it can be a sort of spectrum, can't it? Like, some people can be having an absolutely terrible experience, really difficult relationships, all the way through to this stuff might help already okay relationships be even better. So, you don't have to be in the absolute depths of despair about this, I suppose, to see benefits.
Yeah, no, most people are not in that place. And most coaching actually focuses on just what you said, like making good situations even better. So, which was kind of one of the strange things about when this work started just showing up for me. So that,
Yeah, great, great. And what surprised you about writing this book?
well, I think maybe again, two things. One was like I determined like to have the support of like what I'm going to do air quotes like a proper publisher, Eloise. So and that was because I just knew that all the stuff like editing and the kind of strategic thinking about which bits of the book should go where, I just wanted some help on that. So that was, when you got on board, I was just like really chuffed about that. And the thing that surprised me about it was like, you're quite fierce, so I got some quite challenging feedback from you in the process of writing the book and I hadn't quite expected that. And it was a funny experience to be, and I noticed I got a bit difficult about it sometimes. Like I hope you didn't see that, but like I would finish a call with you, or I'd get an email from you, and I'd go into my another message from Eloise saying this bit needs to change. So I noticed I was getting quite difficult, which writing a book about working with difficult people, it was quite funny to notice that.
Yeah.
So I think that was, for me, that was a really pleasant surprise, was just uh, how kind of constructively challenged I felt as part of that process.
Yes. Oh, well, I hope it wasn't too challenging, and I
No.
didn't get I didn't get that impression from you, Nick. Yes, I think it's always with good intentions. And because we want the book to be a good experience to readers, and I've said this many times on my LinkedIn blog that I always treat myself as like your reader, and if I'm not quite getting something, or if I think things should be reordered, then we want to see the benefit, don't we? But well, I'll remember that I've been called fierce now.
Thank you. I think the principle is like, if you want to do something really well, then you need to kind of get good people involved and make sure you listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Crikey. And last question, how do you want readers to feel about reading your book?
I think I want people to feel that there's always something positive you can do to make things even better than they are. So, it's a cliched word, but I genuinely want people to feel quite empowered when they've got this book. It doesn't matter
Yeah,
where they're starting from, whether they're stuck when they start, or if they're not stuck and they just want things to be better. Like, I want them to feel that they're empowered to do that themselves.
fantastic. Yes, that sounds like a really good outcome for readers. Great. Okay, so it's time for your session on the way to manage difficult people and strategies for success at work. So don't forget, everyone who's watching, you can use the Q&A function if you want to ask Nick a question, but I will hand over to you, Nick.
Super, thank you. Let me get my slides up.
Fantastic.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be talking about my book this afternoon, and actually a little bit nervous as well. Um, it's really great to see people coming along. I can see the kind of numbers of participants going up, so fantastic. And as Eloise said, we'll make use of the chat for Q&A at the end. Here's what I'm going to try and cover this afternoon. I'm going to talk about the mindset of working with difficult people, just like what's a good place to have your head in when you're doing this kind of stuff. And I want to say something around the costs, what it costs a business if you've got difficult people in your business, and what it costs the people in it as well to deal with that. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. And also, one of the first questions that people ask me with this stuff is, why? Like, why has this happened? Why has someone become difficult at work? So I want to talk a little bit about the why, like why it happens and what the reasons for that are. And as I do that, as I go along, I'll give some useful tools all the way through. I think just like really simple things you can pick up and try for yourselves, and some examples as we go of each of the 9 types. And I'll probably do some of the types more than once, just because they come up a lot. And that way we can get a feel for who those people are, how to spot them, and how to deal with them. And I want to share like a small personal story of mine first. And it's this. So this is a picture of me from what, it's quite a few years ago now. This is when I was first starting to think about the idea of doing this book. And the giant compass you can see in this picture, this is just something I was doing for volunteer work, teaching teenagers how to navigate in the outdoors. And you see there it's got this big red arrow pointing right at me. So and this is the point here. So I'd started doing this work, for no reason really. Difficult people started turning up to my coaching practice. And I said to my wife and my teenager one day, I might actually have to focus my work on this. This might be the thing I actually have to do. And I'm not quite sure how it might go, it might be a bit of a risk. And straight away, like my wife and my teenager just turned to me and they said, "Oh, no, it's like, there's no risk. It makes perfect sense, Nick, because of course you are so difficult." So I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but maybe it is a good lead into the next bit, which is around the mindset, like where do you need to have your head when you're working with difficult people? So first bit of the mindset that's often really useful is that someone, or usually at least someone who seems to be difficult at work is actually someone trying really hard to do what they think is the right thing, and often in the only way that they know how. So we usually call that positive intention, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So that's the first part of mindset, which is really useful. The idea that even if someone looks like they're trying to be really difficult, from their point of view, from their perspective, they're trying to do what the best thing is. So that's the first thing to really kind of get our heads around. And then the second thing is this idea that different, of course, is not the same as difficult. So we all have different ways of being, and different needs for how we work and what brings out the best in us at work. So one principle of my book is that we need to be flexible to adapt to the needs of other people. And of course, difficult is what happens when the impact that someone is having is so negative that it can't be accommodated, that it's not possible to adapt to it. And that's the second thing. So the third thing to kind of get our heads in the right place for is, well, it's this really, like if we meet a difficult person in the morning, that's just part of life, right? That happens. And if we meet another difficult person in the afternoon, well, that's unlucky. You've had an unlucky day. But what if you're meeting difficult people all day? I think this either means that, well, we're in a really bad situation and we need to get out of it, or maybe we need to look in the mirror ourselves a little bit more. So those are the things, like watch out for the different perspectives, make sure the different is not the same as difficult, and check who it is who's difficult. And then I want to say next a little bit more about one of the principles in my book, and that's the principle of fierce kindness. Now, fierce kindness is one of these things that actually it's been really interesting. Like lots of people are picking up on this. So, like I've done a couple of podcasts as a guest about this. So I've done some guest writing about it already, and it's this idea that by itself, kindness is not going to make a difference, but it's essential. And by itself, being fierce, like really confronting someone who's difficult, is probably not going to be the best thing, but you do need some of it. You know what? Like I had an example of this yesterday. I was with a client yesterday, and they were telling me about this situation. So they're a senior leader, like a really professional person. All of their colleagues are professionals, and one of the things about being in a business where everybody is a professional is like you don't really have that much power over other people. So you have to lead by influence. And with one particular colleague, this person had kind of got to the end of being able to do that. And they said, it's like this person is coming into my kitchen, grabbing the milk and tipping it all over the floor. And I'm just saying, oh, right now, we all need to work together to find a way to clear this milk up. And that was too much kindness going on there. So you need this dynamic contribution so we do need to do all we can to understand what's going on and put ourselves in other people's shoes. Plus, we need to be fierce enough to just not mess around. If someone's coming in your kitchen, chucking the milk over the floor, you don't really want to be saying, oh, let's find a way to work together, clear this up. You need to be saying, that's not an acceptable thing to be doing, and set out the consequences, of the no messing consequences. And I think how we behave towards each other is really important. Good relationships at work are worth protecting. And to protect something properly, you do need to be a bit fierce about it. So that's one of the principles I really love, fierce kindness. There you go. And next, I want to talk a little bit about the cost. What does it cost a business if someone is being difficult? And what does it cost the people in it? Now, the great escape is often the first sign of a difficult person at work. You'll know this saying, that people say it a lot now. They say that you don't leave a job, you leave a bad manager. And there's some really interesting statistics about this. So as many as 75% of people who've quit a job say that a bad manager was one of the reasons they quit. And this kind of stuff is expensive. It costs a lot to recruit a replacement. If anybody watching a recruitment consultant, you'll know this. Like often it's up to like twice the annual salary for a professional person. And that's before you take into account things like the loss of income or the loss of fees that can also happen, the loss of customers and clients that might go with one of those people. And one of my clients estimated that for a junior person they'd lost because of the actions of a bad manager, had cost them maybe up to £100,000 of lost fees. And then there's quiet quitting. So again, this is something we are hearing more and more about these days. This is the idea that people don't necessarily leave because there's something they're not happy with. They just stop giving their best. And of course, this also costs the business. And again, there are some really interesting facts around this. So companies with disengaged employees, for example, they are typically 15% less productive, at least, than other companies. And for most companies, that 15% is your profit margin. So if that's happening, if you've got disengaged employees, that just can wipe out your whole profit. And it's not just profit as well, because we know that companies with disengaged employees have around 30% lower customer satisfaction than other businesses. So there's a big cost to this stuff. And then there's what I call management fatigue. And again, I don't see this talked about so often, so I try and make a point of covering it. This is another useful sign that there's a difficult person at work. It is emotionally and physically draining to work with someone who is just taking all of your energy. And it takes huge amounts of time. Another client told me just recently, said something like, I think it was about 36, I've got 36 people in my department. And this month I've spent around 80% of my spare time just trying to deal with this one person. So there's a huge physical, emotional, and time cost. Okay, so those are the costs. And I'm going to ask people to just put themselves into the shoes of a difficult person, much as the same way as I did with my compass at the beginning. So let's pause for a few moments, and I want to ask you to reflect a little by yourself. And you might want to make some notes for this, or you might not, it doesn't matter, but just take some time to remember a time when you were perhaps difficult in some way at work. Remember what was going on and think about why you might have become difficult. Good. All right. And when you've done that, we'll move on and look at some of the reasons, the why do people become difficult, some of the things that I've explored in the book. So I think there are maybe 4 different things that are helpful to know about why people become difficult at work. And the first of this is people's reactions to the stresses and strains of working life. So people have stretching targets to achieve. Some businesses are struggling. Big organizations go through reorganization practically, every 3 or 4 years at least. And stresses and strains come from outside the business as well. So there might be a new competitor, a new regulation to deal with. And we'll talk about the types of stress reactions and how that links into the types of difficult people later on. And the second answer to that why question, why do people become difficult at work, is just that point about positive intention that I covered earlier. And this is really important to remember. So as I said before, a difficult person, usually someone trying very hard to do what they feel is the right thing, often in the only way they know. But sometimes it really doesn't seem like that. Sometimes it seems more like they're deliberately doing the wrong thing. But if we want to deal with what's happening and even help that person, we need to try and see things just a little bit from their perspective. And then the third reason is the self-doubts and the self-sabotage that make things worse. You know, one of the common forms of these, again, I was talking with clients just this week about that, is the imposter syndrome. That's a form of self-doubt. Any kind of little voice that whispers in your ear, stuff like, oh, you're no good at this, or people will find out that you don't know what you're doing, or everything's going to go horribly wrong. And what happens is that these self-doubts, although they're intended to help us, they often don't really. They're not actually a really good form of kind of self-monitoring. And what happens is they amplify people's stress reactions and they keep us stuck and they stop us from doing something positive about it. So it's really important to know that this happens for everybody. I have never worked with anybody who doesn't have any of those self-doubts or a form of imposter syndrome, which is unique to them. It happens for everybody. So we really need to understand that this is going on. Even when someone can be quite aggressive towards us, what's going on in the back of their heads is probably some kind of self-doubt. And then there's what I call inflexible approaches. And this is about always doing things the same way because that's how we've always done it. And again, I'm going to say a little bit more about that when we come to look at my matrix of difficult people. And those inflexible approaches are another useful way of looking at the different types and helping to make a positive change. Like if we understand what is inflexible about that approach, we can really help people to shift out of it. So next, I want to talk about the first dimension of my matrix of difficult people. And you'll see I'm calling it a matrix because there's it's a 3x3 grid, and I'll show you a complete version of that in a second. First, I want to look at these things called the stress strategies. And there are 3 types of these stress strategies. This is what happens when people are under pressure and they react in some way, often unconsciously. So the top line of people here will disconnect if they're under stress. They will take themselves away, separate themselves from the rest of the business. And everyone on that top line does that in some way. Let's look at an example. So if you look at the top left, that's the scary specialist. And this is the difficult person who is an expert in their field and really isn't afraid to let you know it. And if that person's under stress, they really just want you to go away and leave them alone to get on with things without interference. And then on the middle line, we've got people who have what I call an excess reaction to stress. When they're under pressure, they just keep trying harder and harder and harder. And I've got another example for you here. So in the center of that matrix, the upside down face, that's the revolutionary. This is the person who really wants to change everything all at once. And if you put them under stress, well, what do? They will try and change even more without worrying about the fallout that this causes. So that's the excess line in the middle there. And then the third group of people have a reaction to stress that's all about avoidance. Everybody on that bottom line tries to make sure that things don't go wrong or that no one gets upset. So if you look at the bottom right, the figure with the wide open eyes, that's the people pleaser. And these are usually friendly and very trusted people, but they will try and actively ignore all kinds of problems and ignore all kinds of other issues to avoid having a difficult conversation. So those are the stress strategies, the way that people respond when they're under pressure, and often unconsciously. And let's look next at the way people get stuck in one way of approaching things, of that idea of like always doing things the way you've always done them. And what happens when that becomes too rigid. And this is what I call the attention focus. And again, we've got three groups of how people focus their attention. It's their unconscious preference for how they like to approach things, how they view their work, how they see the world around them, how they respond to things. And it's normal to have a kind of attention focus, like everyone has one. And it only becomes a problem when we get stuck and we can't shift the focus of our attention to suit our circumstances. And what that does, of course, is it amplifies that stress response. So you might be under stress, you might be avoiding things, and you're stuck in this one column, this one way of doing things. Let's look at some examples. Take someone who has a task focus, for example. And if you look in the middle left, the green face with the kind of scowly eyebrows, this is the driving force. This is a type of difficult person who sees everything as a challenge, who sees everything as an achievement to be ticked off with their task focus. And what happens with this person and their task focus is if you get in their way when they're doing that, and particularly if they've ramped up things to try harder and harder because of their excess stress strategy, if you get in their way when they're doing that, one of my clients said, it's like being hit by a truck, Nick. And other people have what I call a systems focus. Again, let's look at an example there. So if you look at the one on the top row in the middle, with the exploding head. Now, this is me when I get difficult. This is what I call the dark strategist. This person really understands how everything is connected. They like having plans that are really carefully joined up. And because of their systems focus, when they're under stress, a dark strategist will treat anybody who doesn't understand how everything needs to join up as a bit of an idiot. They'll make you feel stupid. And they'll try to manipulate you and treat you like a chess piece, someone to be moved around as they see fit and kept in the dark about it. And then the last group of people, everybody in that right-hand column, have a people focus. And they see everything in terms of people's thoughts, feelings, and social status. If you look at the figure with the sunglasses on the middle right, for example, this is the empire builder. This is someone who's usually very charismatic, but they're so concerned with having people idolize them that they cannot tolerate any criticism. And this kind of person would rather shoot the messenger than having to deal with anything complicated when they're under stress. And the trick is, of course, for that person to shift their focus out of like being worried about what other people think about them and get on with tackling those inconveniences that the messenger is trying to tell them about. So that's, and I'll talk a little bit more about flexibility and having that later on. So if you put all those things together, if you put the three stress strategies together with the three sets of attention and focus, you get a 3x3 grid. And this is the matrix of difficult people, which is covered in the book. And some of these people here, we've talked about briefly already. I'm not going to read out the names. You can see this stuff later. And of course, it's in the book, and we'll get Eloise and I've got some other stuff for you that we can point you to. And I'll introduce all of those we haven't covered as we start to look at how to deal with a difficult person at work. And next, I just want to pause to ask you to do some more reflection yourself. And it's this. Remember a time when you had to deal with a difficult person at work. Remember what was going on and think about how you dealt with that situation. And when you've done that, we'll move on and have a look at some of the practical tools that help. But for now, just take a few moments to reflect a little by yourself when you had to work with someone difficult. So you'll see in my book that I've set out all kinds of tips and tactics for dealing with each of the 9 types of difficult people. How do you spot who they are? What do you do when you've spotted them? And some overall principles like the positive intention, fierce kindness that we've talked about. And those are things that can really help. And for today, I want to draw out some of the themes, some of the practical tools that will always work no matter what your situation is. These will help whether you're working with a difficult person or if you're the leader, or even if other people are suggesting that you might be difficult to work with. And as I go through each of these 6, I'll give examples again of how they relate to some of the specific types of difficult people. The first one, I've called it fix stuff, because it's something that comes up quite a lot. Fixing stuff is about dealing with the things that aren't working at work before you try and deal with a difficult person themselves. So it could be something really small. Like this is a real example that caused a lot of friction in one team I was supporting. They had a remote login that just took forever to work each day, and it just kind of got to the point where they couldn't bear to log in and kind of do stuff collaboratively. So like a real example of something really small that should have just been fixed. So anything that might need to be fixed before you start addressing a difficult people themselves is worth doing. Might even be something you're doing without thinking about it. And a lot of the time, this kind of thing is a leadership issue. Leaders have to look at what's not working in the organization itself before blaming their people. But there's 3 other things that seem to come up quite a lot. The first is communication. Communication is important because people need to understand what's happening and why. For example, if leaders haven't sold their people on why something challenging needs to happen, that just adds to everybody's stress. And conflicting priorities come up as a problem for several of the types of difficult people. So take the martyr, for example. This is someone who's usually a highly principled and uncompromising person. But if the business hasn't been clear about its priorities, a martyr can often end up sacrificing themselves and their team for the sake of a project that maybe not everybody on the board thinks should actually happen. So businesses need to get their priorities in order. And the last is about safe space. And again, we hear a lot about this these days. If we want to make it possible for people to be at their best, businesses and other organizations have to make it safe for people to disagree and to disagree out loud, so that any differences can be used, different and problems in the business can be resolved. And if people are afraid to talk about stuff, then that just gets overlooked and becomes a problem. All right. So the next thing that usually helps pretty much anybody in whatever their situation is about getting into action. It's sometimes tough for us to do something about a difficult person at work. Lots of people say to me, we worry about making things worse, so we didn't do anything. Or people say, we didn't know what we could do. Like, how do you shift things around rather than just take the totally nuclear option of firing someone? Or if you've got a difficult boss, for example, is it just I'm either stuck with it or I leave? Is that it? So what can you do? And it's, when we're working with someone who's being difficult and they're really stuck in that pattern, it's hard to believe that change is possible for them. So take the warrior, for example. This is another one of the types of difficult people, someone who's usually really detailed focus, who tries to be doggedly helpful, but at the wrong times, their desire to avoid making mistakes can actually make things worse. This is the type, the warrior, has the biggest tendency to micromanage. And anybody who wants to help them really has to get to the root of what they're worried about. And anybody who works with them has to really actively protect their boundaries. And I'll talk more about boundaries later on. So my message is, whatever the situation, take some action. My experience has been that the best way to make a tricky situation really bad is to do nothing, or to tolerate something that shouldn't be tolerated, and it just builds up and builds up over time. So get into action. But let's look at something in a little more depth that can often get in the way of taking action, and that's self-doubt. So whether you're leading, working with a difficult person, or worried you might be difficult yourself, this is really important. Self-doubts and self-sabotage, how we sometimes trip ourselves up at work, is what keeps people stuck in being difficult and what stops other people from dealing with it. I'm going to give a couple of relevant examples. Check out the principles and the specific sections of the book to explore each of these in more detail. I've got self-doubts and other kind of self-sabotaging for each of the difficult types. But if we look at one of the 9 types, the rock, this is the kind of highly responsible person who keeps everything running in your business. They're like a rock in that way, in that you can rely on them. But they're also like a rock in that they will silently and immovably refuse to do anything that they consider risky or low priority. In the wrong situation, they're tough to manage and tough to work for. And as a boss, you'll see them being inflexible. And if you work for them, you'll probably have this terrible sense of being always pushed for time. And if you think you might have a rock at work, listen out for some of their self-doubts and self-sabotage. You can almost like see their gremlin talking in their ear. And you might hear that person say things out loud like, "Oh, I don't have time." Or, "That's just the way things are around here. We can't change it." Or you might hear the rock say, "Well, that's been tried before and it never works, so we're not going to do that." And if you hear anything like this, you'll know who you're dealing with. And at the same time, make sure you're keeping track of your own self-doubts too. That awareness of what you think might be keeping you stuck is a crucial first step towards overcoming our self-doubt. All right, and I want to say a bit more about flexibility next. So flexibility is the opposite almost of being stuck in one way of doing things. And it helps us deal with a difficult person because it's about keeping on trying to make things better until we find a way that does work. You know, like if the first way we try doesn't work, then you just try something else. That's what being flexible is about. And it's useful if you're leading with or working for a difficult person. Remember that they are the stuck one. They're typically looking at things with only one of those attention focus. They're either focused hard on tasks, they've got this wide systems focus, or they just care about what people think. But you are not stuck. You can try different things which will help get a better response from that person. Be flexible. And there's one really cool way of experimenting with being more flexible in how we approach things is to think about someone you admire or respect and who probably does things differently to you. And, you know, we've all seen this. Just ask yourself, what would they do in my situation? And then do that. And that's a great way of like having more flexibility if you're concerned that you've only got one typical way of doing things. So next we'll look at one of the most important parts of looking after yourself and others when there's a difficult person at work, your boundaries. Boundaries are a great way of making sure that other people don't mistreat you, don't take advantage of you, or don't behave badly around you. And some of the types of difficult people are more likely to cross a boundary than others, but it's something that always needs to be addressed. If you've got any kind of difficult person, tricky situation at work, look at boundaries. So take the scary specialist, for example. Remember, this is the expert who isn't afraid to let you know it. Now, this person can be extremely critical of how you're doing your job. But on the flip side, they also respect drive and independence. So if you've got a scary specialist and you stand up to them, if you tell them, well, you know what, like you're being too critical of me, you've crossed a boundary there and I'm not going to be tolerated. I won't tolerate being treated like that. That can really help. They'll probably respond quite positively to that because they'll recognize themselves in you. And again, boundaries really are a leadership issue. I've said here, you know, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And this is a real leadership issue. Leaders need to make sure they're actively setting boundaries about acceptable behaviors for the whole organization too. So set boundaries. You can be quite fierce about your boundaries, and you don't need to do this on your own. And I want to talk about the importance of allies next. So if you're dealing with a difficult person or a tough situation at work, it can often feel quite isolating, but it doesn't have to be that way. Whatever type of difficult person you're dealing with, take stock about who might be an ally for you first. And here's a couple of examples about why that's important. So say you're dealing with a revolutionary. This is someone who pushes for far-reaching transformation, wants to change everything all at once. But one of the things they won't do is they won't worry about getting consensus. They won't worry about getting agreement with that. They will just do it. And they're often appointed to do that, to behave that way. But if you're working for that person, you'll need to do all you can to make sure that you do keep in touch with your colleagues. Make sure you've got allies, just in case it all goes horribly wrong. What if you're working for somebody like me, a dark strategist? And remember, when this person is under stress, they'll have closed off all the lines of communication, and they'll be keeping you in the dark too, because they don't trust you to be smart enough to figure it out. They just want to move you around. But don't let that happen. Make sure you're building alliances so that you can talk to other people in the organization, so that you can stay informed about what's happening, and make sure that you've got help if you're feeling manipulated. So for all of us, the kind of support and information that we can get from a good ally can be really crucial if we're up against it. And it's often the place that I will start with people who come to me and say, like, I'm dealing with a difficult boss and I don't know what to do. Okay, so just gonna pause again briefly for some more self-reflection. And here's what I want you to reflect on. What are you going to take away? So having heard like a really brief coverage of the book, what other information might you want to discover? Perhaps there's some action you've heard, some stuff that rings a bell, you know there's some action you need to take, or maybe it's time for you to connect with some allies. So what is it? What are you taking away? Good. So here's my message, really. Firstly, that point again about positive intention, so crucial to remember this. A difficult person is almost always someone trying very hard to do what they feel is the right thing, usually in the only way they know how. And in the wrong circumstances, any of us could be experienced by others as difficult. And if that happens, the worst thing to do is to do nothing. There's always something positive that can be done to change things for the better. Now, we know that great businesses and other organizations can only really deliver great products and services if the people in them are feeling at their best. And we also know that working lives now are around 80,000 hours, if not more. That is a massive chunk of our lives. So, and I want work to be a place where people can be fulfilled. They can be fulfilled, they can feel they're doing something really cool. I want work to be a place where people can come together and support each other to achieve things that we couldn't do on our own. And then everybody wins. Well, thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. That was really interesting and a great overview of the 9 types. We've got some questions coming in, so please do feel free to keep sending them. I will get started. So here's one. I tend to understand the situation well after the event, somehow too late for the correct response. I think we can all relate to this. How can you become more conscious in real time as the situations unfold?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that. Well, I think it's about building that muscle of awareness. So, and I mentioned about intuition earlier. There probably are signs. And one of the things I often have people do is just to start looking out for the signs. I feel it's a bit like a traffic light, so as you're driving up towards a traffic light, if it's green, fine, you're going to carry on. If it's amber, you should slow down rather than speed up. And if it's red, you should be coming to a stop. So the muscle to be developing is like understand when your traffic light is green. Understand if there's some amber in it, so there's something you don't feel quite right, or understand if you're getting a red light. So just practice looking out for the traffic light. I think that's the thing I most often do with people.
Right, right. I like the idea of the muscle. I think by practice you'll get better at it, I think. Here's another one. What happens when your allies all move on or out?
Yeah, another great question, Eloise. And I have actually seen this happen. Um, so I would encourage people to not just think about allies within the organization. Um, there are formal groups. I'm a big fan that people should belong to their union if they have a union. I'm a lifelong union member myself. There's loads of great professional development. So join your union. Like if you're really struggling, talk to somebody like ACAS. Um, Friends, neighbors, relations. Anybody can be an ally. And one of the things that we're probably quite bad at, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a British thing perhaps. We don't actually necessarily think about, oh, I need allies. We're told to be independent, look out for yourself, solve problems by yourself, which is great. Those are really useful skills. And we're stronger together. Human beings are definitely stronger together. I think, like, so to answer that question specifically, I would look outside the organization, and allies will show up in all kinds of surprising places if you look.
Fantastic. Oh, this one. Thank you, Nick. I'm walking away with a rich DIY-like toolkit. How can this person keep going and improve step by step in the long term? How to keep focus and motivation?
I wonder if that person's asking that because they're in a difficult situation themselves or not. So I might give two different answers to that. So skills to practice. One, look out for stress responses. So come back to that. I always come back to that matrix. Look out for stress responses. When I'm under pressure, how do I respond? Do I take myself off and disconnect? Do I just try really hard? Do I have an excess response, or do I try and avoid making mistakes? And just be really conscious of those stress responses and try and make them more. No, I'm going to say the same again. Try and become more conscious of them so you know it's happening, and then you've got a choice about doing something different. And the different thing is often the other dimension of the matrix. So if you're someone who usually focuses really hard on the tasks, on the tick list that needs doing, try focusing instead on relationships with people, or try looking at the bigger picture of the systems. So the things to practice are the rows of the matrix and the columns.
Right, great. That's useful. Here's another. I see myself as having traits of several of the categories depending on the situation. Is this possible?
I think it could be. As much as I love my book, Eloise, and I love my 3x3 matrix, human beings are complex things, and we don't easily fit into boxes. And I would encourage people not to put themselves in boxes. That's Andrew who's asked that. I can see now. So yeah, absolutely possible, Andrew. Pick the information which is going to be most useful for you in the situation you're in, because I think also. Again, human beings are highly context dependent, and most of the kind of personality frameworks, the behavioral traits and preferences, they are context dependent too. So in one work situation, this could happen. In another work situation, this could happen. So pick the one which is most useful for you in the situation you're in.
Right, great. That makes sense to me. What if more than one person in the team feels the same about the manager, that it's difficult to work with that person? Sounds like a
Yeah,
majority.
yeah, yeah. And of course this comes up a lot. Well, firstly, that's what I was saying earlier. If you meet a difficult person in the morning, unlucky. But if you're all meeting the same difficult person, and that's good evidence that something's going on. So there's that. It's good evidence. Secondly, there's a potential ally there. So that's more than one of you who can do that. I think get interaction if you can. Like if there's more than one person there, get interaction about it. Depends entirely on what that person's situation, about how they might do that. And there's more tips in the book about depending on circumstances what you should actually do. But yeah, I would treat that as both evidence and as an ally and as a motivation to actually get something done about it.
Okay, so you could compare tactics and what's worked and what's not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I guess like unless that person was the manager themselves, Eloise, you know, which again has happened. You know, I've had people come to me and say like, three members of my team are fine, and two really don't like my style. And then that's a sign that that manager is perhaps being inflexible in their style, and they're not changing their focus to suit the people that they're with.
Yes. Oh, here's another good one. I think you should have a sort of a Dear Nick column. I think that would be good. Uh, what do you think about dealing with a difficult manager who is a perfectionist and doesn't appreciate your work?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, perfectionist says to me that they're probably a scary specialist, um,
Mm.
rather than a warrior. There'll be someone who's in that task column of my matrix because they're really focused on the work rather than the impact that their feedback is having on that person, Eloise. Um, and again, like the same strategies are really important. Like set your boundary. What kind of feedback do you need, and what kind of feedback do you not need from that person? And you need to tell them. You need to tell them, like, again, take action. Um, this is not the kind of feedback which is useful for me. I want to grow and develop as a person. I want to get better at my work. Here's how I need feedback from you to help me do that. And and some of the types are really bad at like tutoring and coaching. Again, I think it's like the task focused ones. They don't really care. They just want, if they could have people who are like ready made and just straight out the box, they would pick those people every time. So if your manager is what was the question again? How you do with that? You need there's stuff to work on.
If they're a
Yeah, yeah,
perfectionist and they're
yeah.
not,
If they're a
you're not
perfectionist.
getting much
Yeah,
appreciation.
yeah. I think depending on what type they are, you could probably ask them for something different, and you probably, if your relationship is strong enough, you'll probably get it, but you won't unless you don't ask for it, and it's a boundary issue.
Yes, yes. And you said earlier that you you might as well try to make things better. Inaction is probably the bad idea.
Inaction is almost like the only way to get this totally wrong, really.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think we've got time for a couple more. So, how do you deal with being told every few years by a different manager, um, that you need to work on something, but you worked on it previously and you got positive feedback from a different manager? So I guess it's
Yeah.
sort of um, cycles of feedback, let's
Yeah,
say.
yeah, and that's a slightly different take on something we've talked about earlier, isn't it? I really like that as a question. Well, one of the things I didn't say today, and I covered in the book, well, it comes under that category of fixing things, I guess. Actually, like, is there any truth in that? Like, have you still got stuff to do? Because maybe this different manager sets a higher standard. So part of this person's choice, Eloise, is that true? Like, is there still stuff they need to work on? And if there is, just do it. Like, get better, raise your game. That's one of the ways to, if you've got a manager who is setting a really high standard, one of the ways to respond to that is actually to fix it, to raise your game. And if that person's being ridiculous and setting a high standard that is just totally inappropriate, then we're in the answer to the previous question, which is like, it's a boundary issue. Don't tolerate it. Look for allies. Ask for what you need from that person.
Fantastic. Great. Great. Well, this has been, oh, let's hear. We've got one more. I think this will be good. How do you deal with racism or microaggressions or bad language?
Yeah, Patsy, that is another fantastic question. And or maybe you wouldn't be surprised by how often this comes up. So first thing, of course, racism, bad language, things that shouldn't be tolerated in the workplace. They just shouldn't. So the first part of that is do not put up with them. Um, one of the things that came up for me is people who've got a people pleaser boss, and the people pleaser will often let other people in the team do microaggressions or use bad language in the room, or just behave badly, and they'll tolerate it and tolerate it rather than having a difficult conversation. So so I would say to that person, don't tolerate it. It's a boundary issue. Look for allies who are on your side. whether that's in the organization, in the team, or outside the organization. Set the standard that's important to you, and don't put up with it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really a really important message.
It comes up much more than you would think. I often look at, I'm on the kind of I forget what it's called, one of the forums on Reddit, which is for this type of stuff. And oh my god, like people just like, how do they behave like that at work? It's just, that is not how it should be. There's my negative motivation. It should not be like that. Work can be really fulfilling
Yeah,
if we do this stuff.
absolutely. Yes. Okay, so I will just share my screen again. Right, so if people want to keep in touch with Nick, they can of course buy the book, and they can also visit your website. Do you have anything exciting on there for people, Nick?
There's loads of resources, as I was saying earlier, so there's loads of stuff you can download. And in fact, the book has its own microsite at, and I've actually just forgotten the URL. It's something like the 9typesofdifficultpeople.com, I think. So, but it's linked from my main website. So if you go to nickrobinson.org, you can find everything there. And if you've got a copy of the book, there's a QR code in the book. And if you scan that, it takes you to the book's microsite, and there's loads of downloadable resources there.
Fantastic. That sounds really useful. Well, thank you, Nick. That was really useful. And I'm sure we'll all be trying to put all your good tips into practice. So if you are coming back next month, our next session is on Tuesday, the 23rd of April at 2 p.m. UK time. Our business book of the month is Yes, You Can Innovate by Natalie Turner, and her webinar is on 6 keys to unlock the innovative power potential of teams. So that sounds exciting. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for your great questions, and thank you, Nick. Hopefully we'll see you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for your great questions, everybody. Really appreciated those.
Yes, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Bye.